The house was already half gone when firefighters broke in, and there, standing in the smoke, was a German shepherd who refused to leave. His fur was scorched, his eyes burning red, but he wouldn't move until they followed him. Upstairs, they found a girl unconscious, and something in her arms that stopped everyone cold. What happened next will shake even the toughest hearts. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The hallway groaned above them, a warning whispered in wood and flame. Smoke slithered down the stairwell like a living thing, curling with malicious patience around the frame of the banister. Ranger held his ground, muscles taut beneath his soot-dusted coat, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. His ears were pinned back, not in fear, but in the raw, deliberate concentration of an animal that had been trained to detect danger, and now chose to ignore every instinct to flee. Chief Dan Rivers stepped forward, face slick with sweat, eyes stinging from smoke. He'd seen dogs bolt from burning buildings. He'd seen grown men freeze at thresholds like this, but he had never seen anything like this dog. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing his weight against Dan's shin as if to physically steer him toward the stairs. His tail didn't wag. It pointed like a compass needle. Behind them, the fire roared louder, greedy and rising. Flames licked at the walls with fingers of orange and blue. Windows imploded with sickening pops, and the air turned razor-sharp, filled with glass and ash. But still, Ranger waited, planted like a sentinel, nose twitching, head angled toward the upper floor. Another cough sounded, a ragged whisper of life above the chaos. Dan didn't hesitate this time. "Go!" he shouted to the crew behind him. "We follow the dog!" Ranger spun and bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, his paws barely touching the scorched wood. The team followed, ducking low through the inferno's wrath. Each step up the staircase groaned under their boots, threatening to give. One false move, and the whole structure could collapse. But it didn't. Somehow, it didn't. At the top, the smoke was blinding, thick as tar. Visibility dropped 2 inches. The firefighters fanned out instinctively, calling Ellie's name, listening for the direction of that cough. But Ranger didn't hesitate. He bolted to the end of the hallway, clawing at a closed door. The sound was desperate, rhythmic, almost rhythmic, a Morse code of urgency. Dan rushed forward, kicked the door in. The heat hit him like a wave, but in that instant, he saw it. Barely visible in the darkness. A small shape crumpled on the carpet, an arm shielding her face. Ellie! She wasn't moving, and the fire was coming. The stairwell trembled with the weight of fire above, and beneath it, something worse. A groan rumbled through the timbers like the growl of a dying beast, and then came the crash. The firefighters flinched as the ceiling released a jagged beam, split from end to end by heat and flame, which slammed onto the landing just below. Sparks exploded like shrapnel. The path out was gone. Dan cursed under his breath, grabbing for the radio clipped to his jacket, but the static was screaming now, useless in the roar of combustion. The smoke was no longer smoke. It was a choking tide, thick as wool, pressing down their throats like invisible hands. Visibility dropped to feet, then inches. Somewhere behind him, someone retched into their mask. But then came the sound, sharp, savage, alive. Ranger. He had lunged forward before anyone could stop him, shoulders bared like a battering ram, jaws locked around the edge of the beam. He tugged, hard, snarling as flame licked at his muzzle. The fire bit back, singeing tufts of fur along his neck and shoulders, but Ranger didn't flinch, didn't retreat. The air screamed with heat. The walls hissed as paint blistered into bubbling scars. Yet he kept going. One paw scraped ash aside, then another. Then he wedged his snout under a splintered plank, shoving, grunting through grit teeth. His eyes, watering, reddened, rimmed in smoke, never wavered. One of the crew dropped beside him, trying to help, but Ranger bared his teeth, not at the man, but at the beam itself, as though he could will the damn thing to move. And somehow, it did. A space opened, just wide enough for a body. "Go!" Dan barked, and the first firefighter dove through, cradling Ellie's limp form to his chest. Her arm twitched faintly, involuntary, a whisper of life. Behind him, another man followed, the baby swaddled in his bunker coat like a fragile ember being carried through the storm. Still, Ranger stayed. He turned, coughed, a horrible, wet sound, and glanced once toward the scorched hallway. Then he looked back at the rubble. He wasn't done. He circled the beam, nose low, searching, sniffing. Dan saw it too late, the way Ranger slowed, paused, and let out a single, trembling whine, low and guttural, directed not at them, but at something, or someone, still inside. The sky had darkened with more than smoke. The orange glow of the blaze no longer flickered with urgency, but pulsed steadily, a monstrous heartbeat against the failing twilight. Sirens faded into background noise, overtaken by the low, dreadful hum of despair. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from the realization that something sacred has just been lost. Mitch stood frozen, one knee buried in the soft, trampled lawn, his hand covering his mouth as if it could stop the scream clawing at the back of his throat. The soot clung to his face, streaking the creases around his eyes, turning the lines of age into something carved by grief. Behind him, medics hovered like ghosts, finishing their work on Ellie and the child, alive, breathing, but unconscious, safe. And yet the word felt cruel. Safe, while Ranger was not. The men of Station 47 stood in formation before the blaze, not by protocol, but by instinct. Helmets off, faces drawn tight. No one moved. No one spoke. The fire, unrelenting, had claimed the upper floor, and now the roof groaned under its own betrayal, timbers collapsing inward with the slow inevitability of ruin. Dan held the radio to his chest like a crucifix, the last words still echoing in his ear. We lost him. The thought didn't feel real. Not yet. Not when you'd seen that dog tear through smoke like a creature possessed, eyes full of clarity and purpose. Not when you'd watched him clear a path for humans without hesitation. Not when you'd looked into his eyes just minutes ago and seen understanding. Real, undeniable understanding. But he'd gone back, and now he was gone. The wind shifted, carrying with it a single ghastly howl from within the fire's gut. No one could say for sure if it had been real. No one could prove it was Ranger. But everyone heard it. Dan turned away, jaw clenched. He had commanded men into burning buildings, into car wrecks, into floods. But this was different. This was a dog that had made a decision. Not obeyed, chosen, with no command, no handler's whistle, no leash, just pure loyalty, distilled into action. And now that loyalty had been answered with flame, the house collapsed in on itself at last, the sound like bones breaking in slow motion. The fire spat sparks into the sky, tiny stars burning out on contact with the air. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The charred skeleton of the house stood in solemn silence, a blackened monument to something once living. Its walls, now gutted and fractured, leaned like war-weary soldiers who had lost not just a battle, but a purpose. The smell of smoke still clung to the soil, a bitter, acrid ghost that refused to leave. Shards of glass littered the floor like fallen stars. Burned furniture protruded like bones through ash. It was no longer a home. It was aftermath. On the third morning, beneath a slate-gray sky, the fire investigation team stepped past the collapsed frame with reverent precision. They didn't speak much. There was nothing casual about a job like this, not when the story had already spread like wildfire beyond Greenville, not when every step might bring them closer to a body. The dogs sniffed first, but it was human hands that uncovered the truth. In what remained of Ellie's bedroom, little more than scorched drywall and a corner closet half swallowed by debris, they found him. Ranger. Curled, not in panic, not in pain, but in position. Protective. His body arched around something wrapped in a fire-blackened blanket, his paws resting over it, his muzzle turned down, as though he had died in vigil. It took the crew a long moment before they dared touch him. Even lifeless, the dog radiated purpose, like he was still guarding something sacred. At first, they thought it was a doll. A child's keepsake, maybe, a stuffed animal Ellie had clutched in the chaos. But when the coroner arrived and peeled back the layers of soot-stained cloth, a collective breath caught. It was Ava, the teen mother, 17 years old, skin scorched, arms curled toward her chest in the final reflex of instinctive defense. She hadn't made it out, but Ranger had tried. Somehow, impossibly, he had dragged her, through flame, through smoke, into Ellie's room, had shielded her with his body, had stayed until the very end, and then, only after, gone back downstairs to lead the firefighters out. The story detonated across the country. Cable news, local columns, handwritten letters arriving from as far as Ireland and Japan. Artists sent sketches. Children sent drawings. The Medal of Valor was draped across an empty leash, and the statue, commissioned in silence, unveiled beneath a sobbing sky, was installed outside Station 47. Bronze, life-sized, unmoving, eternal. Ranger sat at attention, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the house once stood. At the memorial, Mitch's voice cracked only once. He didn't wipe the tear that fell. "He didn't just save lives," he said. "He bore witness. He carried the weight that no one else could. And he did it alone." The wind shifted, and from somewhere in the crowd, quiet and trembling, a whisper broke the silence. "Good boy."